see you guys in the dark.
I work in a fairly busy hospital downtown, in the NICU. I usually work at night, and I kid you not, this happened to me less than 5 minutes ago. I figured it would be good to get this down in writing before I forgot. During orientation, we were taught to be observant to the signs of a possible abductor. We were taught to look for oversized clothing, bags, and shifty behavior. Luckily, I've never encountered a strange individual until now. It's currently 2:59 a.m., and I've been sitting at the front desk since 11. I'm a nursing student, so I usually just do clerk work around the unit. I also watch the cameras to make sure no one is here that isn't supposed to be there. It's usually pretty quiet at night. However, I've already had a sort of a weird night, so this just adds the cherry on top. The NICU is a locked unit. That means that in order to gain entrance, you have to pick up a phone which then rings to the desk. Usually it's parents wanting in to see their babies, and family members who are lost. It's quiet around 11, so no one usually comes in or out during my shift with that expectation of housekeeping. One of the security cameras is situated so I can see who is picking up the first phone. I had been sitting there browsing Reddit when the phone rang. I glanced over at the phone thinking it was a parent wanting an update or something like that. It took me a second to register that it was the number for the first set of doors. I picked it up and looked around at the screen. There was a lady in baggy clothing with a sling on her arm. I answered the door, and she said she wanted in to find her cousin, who apparently had been brought up from the emergency department. I asked her for the last name, and she unintentionally rambled off a Latino name that I only caught the first part of. Knowing that we did not have any new admissions, I told her we didn't have anyone by that name. I tried to get some information out of her, and she again said that her cousin had been brought up from the ED. I told her in that case we would want to go to the labor and delivery and talk to them. She hesitated and then said okay, and walked away. I got a really weird feeling from her, so I checked the census to see if there was anyone that was being accessed in L&D, and there wasn't. So either she was at the wrong hospital, or she wanted to go into the unit to do something a little bit more sinister than just see her cousin. I shrugged it off, and figured it was her cousin that was in L&D, and that she would find her, and all that would be well. About 5 minutes later, the same lady appeared in her extremely baggy clothing and her sling. The only difference was at this time, she was putting the sling on, and was using her injured hand to mess with something in her oversized sweatshirt. She picked up the phone, and once again asked to be let in to find her cousin. And that L&D said that they had no one by that name. I told her the exact same thing, and that she would need to get into contact with her cousin, and go back over to L&D. She got hostile for a second, and then hung up the phone. Whether or not she was trying to gain access to the unit for things that she shouldn't be doing, I'll never really know. But creepy lady who looked like a baby snatcher, let's not ever meet again. I'm from Germany, and worked at an old people's home in a little town at that time. The facility was in a rural area on the outskirts of town. One night I had a night shift with a new coworker I never worked with before. He was in his mid-20s. He was in his mid-50s, wearing little round glasses, and for some reason, seemed a little strange to me on first sight. There were usually only 2 workers alone in the facility at night, and our job was to watch over about 100 room dwellers on 3 floors and make patrol rounds throughout the facility. We weren't allowed to use the elevators for security reasons at night, and had to use the stairway instead. I remember the strange weather that night. It was stormy and wild outside when my shift started at about 10 p.m. At this time, most of the personnel was gone. Only one older nurse was in the station room on floor number 2, where we had our headquarters at night. She wasn't used to the newer PC programs, and it took her longer to finish her writing stuff. Me and my coworker started our first round through the house, using the stairways which had heavy doors we had to close slowly and carefully every time to avoid noise. Everything was quiet. Most old people were sleeping already, and after we checked all the rooms, we sat down in the second floor station room and finished some paperwork. The old nurse was still gone, all the doors to the outside were shut, and the house was completely quiet when we were sitting on the table. After 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet, suddenly a heavy door in the stairway was smashed hard. We looked at each other without saying anything, and immediately ran to the stairway. I ran up to the 3rd floor, and my workmate sprinted down onto the ground. We saw nothing and nobody. We even checked the stairway windows. Everything was closed. Someone must have been in the stairway, we concluded. As we found nothing, we continued on our tour, starting from the 3rd floor down to the ground. From there on, I could not stop thinking what the hell would sneak around the floors at the middle of the night. It was about 2 a.m. when we had to change the double sheets from an old, invalid man who peed himself in bed. I stood in the corner of the room beside the bed, backed up against the wall. My coworker was on the other side of the bed. I remember me watching the door, waiting for someone to peer in the room. While I was concentrating on the door and lost in my thoughts, suddenly my coworker freaked out, screaming at the old man out of nothing, ripping around the sheets and tossing around the old man. His face got an angry, creepy look, and I was totally shocked, and not able to say or do anything. I just watched this creepy guy in front of me with the total black windows behind him and the door leading to the dark floors where some freak sneaked around unseen. I stood there pressed on the wall in the corner of that room and felt totally lost, surrounded by psychopaths. We finally reached the ground floor and everything was quiet, only the wind blowing around the house. Suddenly we heard a dropping sound, like someone dropped a knife or something metallic. The sound came from the kitchen area. We ran to the glass door where the sound came from. It was on a long dark hallway with a back door leading to the trash cans and parking lot at the end. We opened that door and searched every single room. I felt extremely uncomfortable and expected an attack at any moment. Again, we found absolutely nothing. Some hours later, we started our last tour for the night. We split up this time, and I checked the rooms like usual. When I looked in one room, an old lady was awake and sat up on her bed. She asked me if I was in her room 5 minutes ago. I told her no, and then that's when she started our tour. She told me that 5 minutes ago she clearly heard someone enter her room. She asked who's there, but didn't get any answer back. Then the door was closed again. I got a creepy feeling while listening to the old lady. I told her to push the alarm button next time something like this happens. I think it's unnecessary to say how I felt for the next hours. Every time I entered a room or walked around a corner, I expected some stranger standing there all the time. I was more than glad when this damn shift was over. Some days later, I met the old nurse who left the facility late at night and told her the story. She told me that the back door to the kitchen area was wide open when she went out and Some days later, I met the old nurse who left the facility late at night and told her the story. She told me that the back door to the kitchen area was wide open when she went to her car that night she left. She reached the back door from the parking lot and called if someone was there. Suddenly she got a very bad feeling, turned around and ran to her car and just drove off fast. She was totally scared and tried to reach and warn us, but didn't find the number. I told her that the back door was definitely closed when we checked the area. We never found out what creepy freak sneaked around there at night, and many night shift workers reported similar experience the following month. The coworker I had to work with that night was fired after one and more complaints about this person emerged over the time. Anyway, I'm glad I don't have to work there anymore, and never will make any night shift myself again. Anyway, I'm glad I don't have to work there anymore, and never will make any night shifts ever again. The mall I used to work the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was very, very large. Probably the largest in my state, I'd say. And all the way up to about 8:30 p.m., it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all the stragglers out, and only at 11 p.m. would all the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark. but they were normally far outnumbered by 4 to 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of the security. This one night, though, shift started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at night time due to the night sky, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts into some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge and flicked on my torch flashlight without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway with my flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 to 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the end of the hallway, and there was the toilet doors to the left and the right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets, though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared, but really confused. I yelled, "Oi! Who is there?" The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listened hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to God I could hear breathing. Low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in the food court bathrooms. I think someone's there." No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Come in. Anyone copy?" Still with no response. I can remember whispering to myself, "What the actual fuck?" I began opening the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't fucking come out of your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now, there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom, "Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you'll never walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was that metal noise? What the hell is actually happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open. Weird. But other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie crap, eh? Come out." When I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me, I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a freaking massive man. At least a head taller than me, or so, and it seemed at my state, this time, he was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s, with matte gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty freaking smile like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or some crap like that. I'm not going to lie, I was so scared, I froze. He lifted his fingers up to his mouth. Shh, before swinging the door open all the way, and sprinted out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out he was just behind the toilet door where I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so freaking close to him, and I didn't even freaking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Turns out, later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on to telling my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none that were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. I needed help, and for some reason my radio fucked itself. Why, though? So weird old guy in the toilet? Let's not meet again. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP phone void DP1 long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scheme, but thankfully, I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call into Verizon, QQuest, etc. Would call in and say DT1 lines were down or outages were there. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I'd do anything male counterparts could do. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., and after 6 p.m., I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I wouldn't blame them, though, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift indeed. I would get a lot of video game, reading, or schoolwork done during this time. But sometimes, I would just wander the building, walk around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to get to a soda, go get food, and so on. One time while I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance. Only there was one camera facing that door. Nothing else really made me feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much because the back of the building faced an arch of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason, they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times, I felt like someone was just watching me. I always try to make it fast when getting a soda or a snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure that I had enough to get in and out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was like 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feeling off, and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and just ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place, and then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head it was just nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere, I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dark male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflection of the lights inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I'd ever seen in the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no reason why he is checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the doors shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the door. They didn't budge, to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which one. Once his eyes locked onto me, he started to bang harder and smacked the glass. I was so scared. It was in the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass to the next. The 911 asked me what the emergency was. I told them where I worked and what my name was. I needed someone to come out immediately. Told them that there was a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from my view. I tried to look in all directions, but I just didn't see him anymore. I knew he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was trying to bang on the doors. And out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed into the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass window. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over my wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have an officer hurry. She said they were on their way. I have read many of these stories on sub-articles, and people say that the cops wouldn't get there fast enough. They just weren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do absolutely nothing about it. Another smash against the door, but along with that glass-breaking sound, sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was definitely music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived, and thanked her for all her support. I stood backed up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was lying on the outside of the entryway. The officer came to the front door, and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw happen. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me, then the damage. At some point, my husband was called and told I could be escorted home by one of the officers. I took a few days off and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with my ex-coworkers who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of provisioner, from smartphones to Blackberries, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt a lot safer there, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds that were worth something. So dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know, to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store, and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot, and last minute checked the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had one headphone in. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much-needed piss. Against the sheriff's office, though? Really? The building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open again till 6 the next morning. But why? By the back of his ripped t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going on. I didn't say anything, though. I just took my eyes off him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they had pulled up. I saw him look at the car, and then at me, back and forth again. As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning and had left my dump pan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful with him. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me or something like that. The man was still there, but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he was yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and can barely stand straight. Still swaying away, I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him this time. I just walked slowly back into the store. Something about his face had really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs had been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all, and wanted no part of it at all. I still had almost 3 hours to go, and 2 before my other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the sign signal for cut across the neck, basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here. We're closed." I shook my head back and forth too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away, but screamed something at me while he's walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands around. Definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift or the wrong job. I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up with him, there he comes again to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I had called the cops, and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he just took off. The police had never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding areas for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't think he could get really far. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad I don't work there anymore.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.